I'm really honored to have our next guest here at Festive Friday, Mike Towns from Douro, kind of one storyteller to another here. You've been collecting stories of your township for a long time. When did you first get interested in stories, and how did that come about?
Well, actually, my dad was a great collector of history, local history and genealogy. His name was Bill Towns, and he was a son of P.G. Towns. And I think he was the first person that went to the archives in Toronto and copied, with a pencil, copied a list of the Peter Robinson immigrants to Douro. It's been published since then, but he was always very interested. He was more interested in facts and numbers and who lived on what lot and what concession. But I was better at remembering stories and the good humor and kindness and so on.
So, your grandfather started the store, P.G. Towns, is that right?
Yes.
Started the general store. And was he someone who you knew as a boy? Like, what was he there, and then your dad was there also, and were you like the next generation around the store at that time?
I was 4 when my grandfather died, and I just wish I had a picture of him holding me. I would set a lot of value on it, but anyway, that didn't happen. My brother remembers him being with him and walking with him and so on. My brother's 14 months older, but I was unfortunately I don't have any memories. But of course I have heard a lot about him.
How did he come to open the business? How did that come about?
Well, his father actually had the post office about 18. I'm not sure what year he started, but in the early 1890s, or maybe from the late 1880s. And my dad said he sold tea and tobacco. And so he just had this, he had the mill in the front room of his little log house. And he sold tea and tobacco and maybe matches, I'm not sure. But anyway, he just had a limited supply of goods there. And my grandfather, when he was 19, he left and went into Peterborough, and he started a small store in the James Lynch building. Now that's the building where the Lynch's drugstore was in. I don't know if anyone remember Lynch's drugstore, but anyway, it's on Hunter Street, and there are 4 units in that building. And there was a lady in the store one day, and she was a daughter of James Lynch, and she told me that Grandpa had been the first tenant in that building, in one of the 4 sections. But unfortunately, he was young, he didn't have experience, and he gave out too much credit. He had to go and work for the wholesaler, and ended up back in Douro. And so when he came to Douro, he knew the people, and he knew the families that he could trust and so on. And he put up the building with his, using a hammer himself along with some help. And it just kind of went from there.
So he built the store himself.
He built the store himself, and his children, I believe they were all built upstairs. They were all born upstairs in the store. Yeah.
And what kind of a community was Douro at that time when he first opened the store? Was it mostly farming around there? Were there like storekeepers and different like saddle shops and that kind of thing?
No, there were 2 stores there actually, and the other one was called Allen's Store, and it was a very good store as well. But eventually there was nobody inherited the store, or the family ran out of people to run it, and it was kind of dying out, I think, when my grandfather started.
So he was the store in Douro, basically.
Yeah, he was the only store. Now, mind you, there were very good stores in Warsaw maybe 2 stores in Warsaw, and a very good store in Indian River as well. So at that time, there was competition there, and my dad always said that there was competition from people that had a horse and wagon and would leave Peterborough. They'd go to the wholesale, they'd leave Peterborough with raisins and pails and nails, and they would go around through the country, and he said they missed out on a lot of business that way.
But it was a general store right from the start.
Yes, and it was right to the end. We sold a lot of, right up into the last years when Chris Coons and my daughter Michelle Towns ran it. They sold fencing and nails, and there was a bake shop there, and a deli, and fresh meats, of course.
So you could almost get anything there.
Well, we had that reputation, all right, and people have told me so many stories about them needing, they needed a mantle for a lantern, and they'd say that my dad would go to the back room and he'd move a lot of boxes, and he'd pull out the mantle like that, and it was just kind of interesting, and
all different items.
yeah, sure.
Yeah. Now, so did your dad take over the store? Is that how?
Yes, my dad and my Uncle Joe, who was a bachelor, took over the store when PG died in 1948. So PG started his first store in 1892, and he died in 1948. And at the same time, the store had the post office in it, and for many years it had the switchboard he was also the township treasurer, so people had to pay their taxes at the store, and in the days of the old municipal telephone system, people would, if there was a death in the family in Western Canada, they would send a telegram to the Douro post office. And my grandpa for many years did not drive, and he would walk to the farm and with the message.
Sort of like the station masters and during the war when the railway, where they'd get the message and they'd have to go tell people.
I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. You sounds like quite a character, your grandfather and your father. So did you spend a lot of time in the store from the time you were quite young?
Yeah, more than we wanted to. My brother and my brother and I and my sister. We wanted to be somewhere else other than the store. And my grandfather was a character. One little story that I like to tell is we have the old ledgers at home where people would buy matches and 100 of flour and a few nails, and that would be an entry. And they would have brought in maybe 3 dozen and 7 eggs at 14 cents a dozen, and 3 pound of butter at 46 cents, and that would be the credit. And so at the bottom, these bills were eventually, the statement would be sent out every once in a while, but they trusted people. But there was a lady by the name of Lottie, and she brought in a pound of butter one day, and she handed my grandpa her list. And he said, "You've got a pound of butter on this list. Why do you want a pound of butter when you're selling me a pound of butter?" And she said, sorry, PG, there was a mouse fell in the cream pail. And she says, I just couldn't eat it. So Grandpa said, okay. He took the butter out behind the wall and rewrapped it and sold it back to her. So there are all kinds of, I understand that the humor in the old Irish helped to keep things going.
You play tonight, there's a lot of the conflict between the Catholics and the Protestants, Irish, and most of the people in this township were Protestant at that time. Was Durrell mostly Catholic?
Durrell was mostly Catholic, but the township of Dummer was very close, and that was, they were considered kind of one area, I think, even though there were two different townships.
Have you heard that expression, the Dummer side of Durrell?
Yeah.
That's a bad one.
From the time I was 10 years old, I heard that one. But anyway, a friend of mine who was in his 90s at the time told me that there were two sides to this story. It's good for us to know that in the case of Durrell and Warsaw, the Durrell, they kind of pulled tricks on each other, and tried to keep the head of each other. But when the Orange Parade was on in Peterborough on the 12th of July, apparently the Catholics set up by the Durrell Arena. They set up a roadblock there, and then the Protestants they had to go up near Lakefield and across up the River Road, and of course they were late for the parade, and that was the purpose of the. But anyway, another thing I heard, just to keep things fair, was when they would be going in with their horses into the parade in Peterborough, the Catholics at one point were taking their pump handles off, so the Protestants couldn't water their horses on the way to Peterborough. So there were two sides to I always like to think there were two sides to the stories.
That's so interesting. Yeah, because Ennismore also was a Catholic area.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
There are a lot of marriages between Ennismore and Durrell.
So, were you, you've written all these books about stories that people have told in Durrell. Were you always interested in the history, or did that come a bit later for you?
I had a certain amount of interest, and I am so sorry that I didn't pay more attention to my dad when I was young. So I think in some cases, I think we have to reach a certain maturity before we set proper value on these stories. Yeah. So once I started collecting them, people were very good to me. When I did the first book, I found a bit of resistance, but then when for people to share their stories with me and open up their picture books, not a lot, but a bit. But once the first book came out and people saw that it was all good news and there was nobody embarrassed, then people started coming to me with their picture books because they heard I was doing another one. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was your process? Did people come to you or did you go into people's homes? How did you do your research?
I would meet them someplace and I would just follow their suggestion. Yeah. And I was using a computer at the store to make signs, like items for sale and so on. So I had a lot to learn on the computer, and I had two different people helping me. They were both professionals, and it was going to cost a lot of money. But anyway, they both quit on me because they ended up. I ended up changing my mind so often, and they would have a chapter done, and I would come along with another picture. I said, I just got to get this picture in there, and so that became a problem. But I was so glad that I learned the system, and a guy that helped me most was Louis Taylor. He worked at Trent University, publishing there, and he was one of the guys that actually quit on me. He says, "You're fired." And I said, "You can't fire me, I hired you." So, but anyway, we became good friends over it all, but he really got fed up with me trying to And so did my children and my wife. They got fed up with me too, trying to put pictures in at the last after they had already edited those pages.
So it's a labor of love you did it. I mean, you just were something you wanted. What was behind it all? Is it you wanted to preserve these stories, or what was behind all that? You wanted your community to know more about itself and each other, or what was that?
Yeah, I'm very proud of our community, and I'm proud to be Irish, and I'm proud to be in the store there, and people were coming into us, and they would buy whatever, and they would give you money, and they would say thanks. And I thought, wow, this must be the right business to be in. So, the store was an easy place to collect stories. And of course, there was a lot of conversation went on in the store, whether it was at the checkout counter or the deli. And I just found that those people, it just meant so much to me.
Like most of us don't connect with that many people in a day that you would have. So you'd know a lot about your own community, a lot about the people's lives and what they were doing.
Yeah, that's right. And I never liked the word gossip. I used to like the word chatting and so on. And I never encouraged people to talk, talk about things that were bothering people or other people's troubles or politics or religion. And
you weren't trying to stir things up. You didn't want to.
No.
There was a barber in Millbrook who would start a rumor in the morning, and by the end of the day it would get around it back to him, and it was completely different than what he said, just to see how it would get worked around.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any particular stories you could share, or particular things in the books that really stayed with you?
Yeah, there was a man out there by the name of Joe Sheehan, and he was the rural road mail driver, and he would often have a story for us. He'd be in every day, of course, to get the mail, and but anyway, he was telling us about Pat and Maggie. They lived, and it was common knowledge in the community that they didn't get along that well, but they hung in there. And anyway, Pat died. He was being waked in the house, and the neighbors were going through, and everybody knew the way the situation was. So this lady said to Maggie, she says, "I don't know how to tell you this, Maggie, but I saw Pat open one eye." And so anyway, she had an answer ready. She says, "Well, dead or alive, he's out of here in the morning." So there are many, as you might see, and when you get a chance to go through that book, there are so many incidents of just a fantastic sense of humor that would help you through the day.
Before we close, it's been really great talking with you, Mike. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to ask? Mike?
I have a few of those books in the car if anybody wants them. They're $35. That's the last book.
Are you going to write another one?
I'm still collecting, but my editors from my house have quit on me. But I might be able to get them talking into it again.
So sit down till I tell you. That's your latest book, and is that something? Is that based on what a person would come up to you like? That's what they'd say.
I guess so. You know, people tell me that my language in the book is similar to the way I talk, and I'm not a highly educated person, and I'm quite proud of that somebody tells me that.
Yeah. Well, I'd say you're a folklorist. You're a professional folklorist. You know, and folklore in many parts of the world, including Canada, is considered to be a very, very high profession. So I'd say you're very educated and capable.
I'd get a raise from you, I know that.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.